The iron seal had not spoken in 400 years. I had pressed my own palm to it the morning I became king in the old way, and it had given me nothing which was expected. The seal did not speak to kings. It spoke only to the one the Dravenmore line was fated to bind itself to, a true Luna, of a bloodline old enough to answer the stone's memory. The seal's silence that morning had been ordinary. I had placed my hand on it and felt cold granite and the faint smell of iron water that rose from the cliff's belly, and that was all. And my council had nodded, and we had gone upstairs, and I had begun my reign. 40 years later, I was still going upstairs alone. Not for lack of candidates. My council had been diligent, almost admirably so. Every winter, before the sea ice sealed the lower harbor and travel became impossible, they assembled the Bloodstone Rite, a procession of daughters from the ranked families of the Dravenmore Covenant. Each one brought down the spiral stair to the vault beneath the great hall, each one pressing her palm to the face of the iron seal in turn. It was not a humiliating ceremony. I had made certain of that in the early years, when I still imagined the rite might succeed. The vault was lit with silver torches. The seneschal read the old words. Each woman placed her palm on the stone for the count of 30 heartbeats, and when nothing happened, and nothing ever happened, she was thanked formally, escorted back upstairs, and fed well at my table. I did not watch their faces as they pressed their palms. I had learned quickly that watching made the ceremony feel like a judgment, and I would not have them feel judged. But I did watch the stone. 40 years of watching a piece of black granite that never moved, never warmed, never gave the faintest tremor. The vault's air smelled of brine and cold rock, and the particular mineral stillness of a space that had not been disturbed in centuries. My wolf found the vault oppressive. He was not a patient creature by nature. My wolf, quick to anger, quick to joy. The instincts of a border garrison king hammered into him across decades of actual war. But even he in that vault went quiet. Not peaceful, just stilled, as if the stone's patience were contagious. As if even my wolf understood that the seal moved on its own time, and our impatience was irrelevant to it. I had made my peace with that understanding somewhere around my 30th year of reign. 40 years in, I no longer arrived at the Bloodstone Rite with hope. I arrived with procedure. The candidates filed in, they pressed their palms, the stone remained granite, and we all went back upstairs. My council had begun in recent years, presenting the rite not as the great search it once was, but as a formality, a dignity owed to the old compact, a gesture of continued faith, nothing more. I appreciated that framing. It made the whole thing easier to attend without the particular ache that hope, repeatedly refused, leaves in the chest. The winter of my 41st year of reign, the rite was held on the third night of the Iron Month, when the sea below the cliff face was already running gray-black, and the wind off the water had a serrated edge that cut through even the heaviest wool. I remember the cold that night with unusual specificity. Not because anything remarkable happened in the great hall, the evening's presentation was ordinary, the candidates presented in turn, the usual families, but because of the cold itself, the particular quality of it. It came through the walls, through the stone floors, through the thick timber of the vault door. It was the kind of cold that made you aware of your own heat as something finite and valuable. I went down the spiral stair ahead of the procession, as I always did, to stand at the far wall of the vault and wait. The silver torches were already lit. They did not warm the room. They only made the darkness more specific. You could see the walls, the low ceiling, the iron seal itself. A rectangular face of black stone set into the granite of the far wall, roughly waist-high, perhaps 2 handspans wide, with no markings on it. Nothing decorative. Nothing that announced its importance. It looked like a piece of the cliff that someone had smoothed and left. The only sign that it was anything other than ordinary rock was the very faint iridescence along its edges when the silver torchlight hit it at a certain angle. A quality that was neither color nor shine, but something else, like the memory of light rather than light itself. I looked at it for a moment in the silence before the procession entered, as I always did. "Still sleeping," I said very quietly to no one. The vault gave me no answer. Of course it did not. The seneschal descended with the candidates. This year there were 7 fewer than in some years, more than in others. 2 were daughters of the Sea Lords. 1 was the youngest daughter of the Covenant's western flank keeper. 2 were from the River Valley families who held the inland passes, and the last 2 were from the capital's ranked houses, brought down by ship before the ice. All of them were presented to me formally before we came downstairs, and all of them had the bearing of women who had spent some time preparing for this, composed, serious, carrying themselves with care. They knew what the seal was. They had been told. I did not hold that against them. I had never held it against any of them. It was not a small thing to be told you might be a true Luna, and it was not a small thing to stand in a cold vault and learn that you were not. The first woman pressed her palm to the seal. Nothing. The second, nothing. The third had kept her hand on the stone for longer than the count. I saw the seneschal's slight tension, the glance toward me to see if I wanted to intervene, and I shook my head slightly. Let her. She kept her hand there for perhaps twice the count before she stepped back, her face very still, and went a stand with the others. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th. I was watching the stone, as always. It gave nothing. The iridescence along its edges did not shift. The air in the vault did not change. My wolf, pressed flat somewhere behind my ribs, was as quiet as he always was in this room. And then something happened that had never happened in 40 years of Bloodstone rites. My wolf moved. Not a large movement. Not the surge I would have expected, the rising violence of recognition, the earthquake of a mate bond hitting. Just a small, alert shift, like a dog who has heard a door open 3 rooms away and lifts its head before deciding whether to act. A noticing, a specific, directed attention. I looked up from the stone. The 7th candidate, the second daughter of the Capitol House, was pressing her palm to the seal. Nothing was happening, but my wolf's attention was not on her. He was pointed, with quiet and peculiar precision, at the vault door. I turned slightly. The torchbearer was there. She stood just inside the vault door, as she was required to. The tradition was that a torchbearer attended the rite, holding the secondary light at the entrance in case any of the silver torches guttered. In 40 years, none of the silver torches had ever guttered. The tradition was one of those formalisms that persisted because it had always persisted, not because it served any real function. The torchbearer was invariably one of the keep's lower hall staff, unranked, unnoticed, simply present as a piece of the ceremony's scenery. I had never once looked at a torchbearer during the rite. I had never had reason to. I looked now. She was a slight woman, perhaps in her middle 20s, wearing the keep's plain linen and a wool overcloak that was practical rather than fine. Her hair was dark and pulled back without decoration. She held the torch in both hands, at the prescribed height, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to be invisible by long practice, and is comfortable with that invisibility. She was not watching the seal, or the candidates, or me. She was watching the silver torch nearest to her on the wall, monitoring it with the patient attention of someone whose job was to notice if it failed. She was doing her job. She was no one. She was absolutely no one, unranked, unmarked, a piece of the keep's necessary machinery brought down to stand in the cold and hold a torch that would never be needed. My wolf was paying her the kind of attention he had not paid anything in 40 years. I did not understand it. I noted it the way you note an unexpected sound in a familiar house, not alarmed, simply precise. Something is different. I don't yet know what. The 7th candidate stepped back from the seal. Nothing had happened. The seneschal began the formal close of the rite. The candidates were thanked. They were told the usual words, that the seal moved in its own time, that their presence honored the covenant, that they would be received warmly upstairs. I said those words myself, as I always did, and I meant them as I always did. The procession began to reform, turning toward the vault door and the stair. My wolf had not shifted his attention. I glanced again at the torchbearer. She had taken a small step to the left to let the procession pass through the doorway, an economical movement practiced, making herself smaller to accommodate the traffic around her. She was watching the floor now, waiting for the room to empty so she could extinguish her torch and follow. The torch in her hands was guttering slightly in the movement of air from the departing procession. The seneschal looked at me and gave the small formal tilt of the head that meant, "Do you require anything further, my lord, or shall I close the vault?" I looked at the stone. It was the same, black granite, the faint iridescence at its edges. No tremor, no warmth, nothing that could be called a sign, and yet my wolf was not looking at the stone. He was looking at the torchbearer, and he was looking at her with the fixed attention of a creature who has learned, through 40 years of patience, not to make noise when something important is nearby. "A moment," I said to the seneschal. He stopped. The procession had already filed out. It was only the two of us in the vault now, plus the torchbearer, who had not yet moved toward the door. She looked up at my voice, not startled exactly, but alert, the way people are when the king speaks unexpectedly in their direction, and they are not certain if they are included in the address. "What is your name?" I asked. She looked briefly at the seneschal, as if checking whether I was perhaps speaking to him. He was watching me with the careful blankness of a man who has long practice at revealing nothing of what he thinks. She looked back at me. "Lysa, my lord," she said. Her voice was even, neither small nor loud. "I hold the lower hall torches, 3rd corridor, east wing." "How long have you served in the keep?" A brief pause, not hesitation, more the small pause of someone doing an actual count. 11 years, my lord." 11 years. She had been here for 11 years in the east corridor of the lower hall, and I had never seen her. "Have you attended the rite before?" I asked. "Yes, my lord, 7 times. I was assigned as torchbearer the first winter I came to service, and they've kept me in the rotation." A ghost of something in her voice, not complaint, just the mild note of a fact she had observed about her own life. "The senior housekeeping staff prefer the higher corridor duties in the cold months. The vault is uncomfortable." I almost smiled. "It is." She did not quite know what to do with that. She gave a small, correct nod, as if receiving a piece of information rather than an agreement. My wolf had not moved. He was still watching her with that fixed, quiet attention, not the way he watched threats, not the way he watched prey, not the way he watched anything I had a name for. The closest I could come was the way he watched doors. Not every door. The particular doors that were about to open. "Lysa," I said, "I would like you to press your palm to the seal." The vault went very quiet. The seneschal's carefully maintained blankness developed a crack, not visible in his face, but in the quality of his stillness, which became a different kind of stillness. He was a man of 60 years of practice. He was too well trained to react, but he reacted. Lysa looked at me with the expression of a woman who has heard something. She is not certain she heard correctly. "My lord," she said carefully, I am the torchbearer. I haven't been presented. I'm not from a ranked family. I'm not a candidate." "No," I agreed, "but I would like you to press your palm to the seal." A longer pause. I watched her think, not confusion, not flattery, not anxiety. She was thinking practically, the way someone who has spent 11 years in a lower corridor thinks. What is actually being asked of me? What is the sensible response to it? And what are the consequences of each option? She did not seem frightened. She seemed like someone being asked to do something unusual by someone who outranked her substantially, and she was deciding whether the request was within the range of things she could accommodate. She looked at the seal, the flat black granite face of it, waist high on the far wall, the faint iridescence at its edges. "Will it?" she began, then stopped herself. "It will do nothing," I said. "In 40 years it has done nothing. It will be cold and it will feel like stone, and you will press your palm to it for the count of 30, and then you may go back upstairs." She seemed to find that reassuring. Specific information: cold, stone, 30 counts, then done. She crossed the vault floor, stepping carefully on the uneven stone, and stood before the seal. She was shorter than most of the candidates had been. She had to lift her arm slightly to place her palm at the center of the stone's face. She looked back at me once, not asking permission, I thought, but something else. Checking that I was still there, that the request was still real, that she had not misunderstood. I nodded. She turned back to the seal and pressed her palm flat against the stone. For the first 2 counts, nothing happened. I was watching the stone. My wolf was watching the woman. I had the odd, brief thought, the thought of a man who has watched 40 years of nothing happen, that I had been foolish, that my wolf's strange alertness was nothing more than the brain of an aging king finding meaning in an ordinary moment, that I had embarrassed this woman and myself and the seneschal for no reason at all, and that the stone would remain exactly as it had always been. The seal woke. Not gradually, not with a slow brightening, the way I had sometimes imagined it in the earlier years when I still allowed myself imagination on the subject. It woke all at once, the way eyes open, a single, complete act. The iridescence at its edges flooded inward, became light, became something that was not quite light but had all of light's qualities, warmth and depth, and the sense of a tremendous attention being directed somewhere. The stone under Lisa's palm went from cold to warm in the space of a heartbeat, and then warmer than warm, and the vault shuddered. Not a small shudder, the whole cliff shuddered. I braced against the wall behind me as the vault floor moved under my feet, not violently, nothing cracking or breaking, but a deep subterranean groan as if the cliff itself had been waiting for a very long time and was now exhaling after 400 years of held breath. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin curtains. The silver torches swayed. Lisa's torch dropped. She had both hands on the seal now, pressed flat against it, and I understood that she had not chosen that. The stone had drawn her in, her second hand coming up instinctively as the warmth hit her, and something in her answered it. Above us in the great hall, I heard it through the stone. Every wolf in Dravenmore dropped. Not collapsed. Wolves don't collapse. Wolves are not fragile that way, but went to their bellies with a concussive, simultaneous weight, as if the seal's waking had reached up through the floors and spoken to each of them directly. I would learn the details later. The hall wolves, the corridor wolves, the patrol wolves at the battlements, the wolves kenneled in the lower east yard, all of them at the same moment bellied out and laid their chins on the stone and did not move. Every one of them pointed, it would later be reported, in the direction of the vault door. My own wolf did not drop. He was already still. He had been still since the vault door opened. He simply settled, like a key finding its lock after 40 years of being the wrong key to every door it tried. There is no good language for what it felt like. I have tried in the years since to find language adequate to it, and every attempt comes out smaller than the truth. The closest I have ever come. It was like remembering something I had not known I had forgotten. The mate mark burned to life on the inside of my right wrist. I had not worn the mark before. Most alphas wear theirs from the moment of their first shift, a faint tracing on the wrist that darkens when the mate is near and lights when the bond is made. I had worn nothing. 40 years of a bare wrist. I had long since stopped thinking about it. And now, in the vault beneath the great hall of Dravenmore Keep, with the cliff shaking and the stone pouring light and every wolf in the building on its belly, the mark traced itself onto my skin in a single movement, dark and clear and permanent. And it was warm in the way that the stone was warm and she was warm, and the whole vault suddenly was not the cold chamber it had been for 400 years, but a room that had been locked and was now open. And the warmth was simply the difference between shut and open. Lisa had gone very still. She was still pressing her palms to the seal. The light had not diminished. It had, if anything, grown quieter, the way a sound grows quieter as it settles into its proper frequency rather than fading. She was looking at the stone under her hands with an expression I could not have named before that moment but could not mistake once I saw it. The expression of a person feeling something they have no reference for, that is completely new to them, that is also, somehow, not surprising. The expression of recognition without knowledge. She did not know what was happening, but some deep thing in her was not confused by it. I crossed the vault. The seneschal did not move. He was standing against the wall near the door, and his face was entirely still, and I was not able to look at him long enough to read him because I was crossing toward Lisa, and I was not looking at anything else. I came to stand beside her. She felt me there. I saw the slight adjustment of her breathing, the awareness of proximity, but she did not step back from the seal. Her hands were still on it. "Lisa," I said. She turned her face toward me. Her eyes, in the light of the seal, were the particular dark gray of the sea below the cliff in still weather, not dramatic, not unusual, just the specific color of something that has always been exactly what it is. "Something is happening," she said. Not a question, not alarm, a report. "Yes," I said. "Is it?" She stopped, looked back at the stone. "Is it supposed to be me?" Such a practical question. Such an absolutely practical lower corridor question. Not what does this mean, or what am I, or what are you going to do, just, am I the right person for this, or has someone made a mistake? "Yes," I said, "it is supposed to be you." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what that means," she said. "I will explain what I can," I said. "Some of it I will need to learn alongside you. Your bloodline, your family name, your clan, I don't know it yet. The seal does. We will find it." She absorbed this. I watched her absorb it the way I had watched her do everything so far, without drama, without collapse, without the performance of reaction. Simply receiving information, holding it, deciding what to do next. "My parents are dead," she said. "I came to Dravenmore from the coast settlements. I don't have a clan name. I was given the keep's name when I entered service." She paused. "Lisa Dravenmore is what the rosters say." "What did they call you before you came?" A flicker, something in her face that was not quite pain, more the quality of reaching for something far away. "Lisa Ash," she said. "My mother called me Lisa Ash. I thought it was a common coastal name." Ash. I had studied the Dravenmore lineages for 40 years in the way a king studies everything that matters to the functioning of his covenant. The ranked families, the old bloodlines, the histories that predated the current order. I was not a scholar, but I knew the outlines. I knew the list of bloodlines old enough to answer the seal's memory. Asheville. The Asheville line, not Ash, but the coastal dialect shortened everything, wore the edges off names the way the sea wore the edges off stone, had been considered extinct for over 2 centuries. The last acknowledged Asheville had died without documented heirs 230 years ago. The records said, extinct. The histories said, extinct. My council, in their thorough preparation for 40 years of failed bloodstone rites, had written the Asheville off the list of possible answer bloodlines 150 years before I was born. The records had been wrong. The sea had kept one. A coastal village, a family with a shortened name, a woman with gray eyes who did not know what she carried, who had come to a clifftop keep 11 years ago to hold torches in a lower corridor, and had done that work with patience and without complaint, and had been assigned to the rites torch rotation, because the senior housekeeping staff preferred warmer duties in the winter months. The seal had waited 400 years. It had known more than the records. Asheville, I said, quietly, because it was not a thing to announce loudly in a cold vault when the person receiving it had no framework for what it meant. Your bloodline is Asheville. It is very old. The seal knows it. She was quiet for a long time. The light from the seal had settled now into something steady and low, like the light from a banked fire present, warm, not dramatic. The cliff had stopped its deep exhale. The vault was very still around us. I became aware, at some point in that stillness, that my wrist was warm where the mark had traced itself, and that the warmth was not unpleasant. "What does it mean?" she asked finally. "For me, I mean, not for the seal or the bloodline for me." It was, again, such a practical question. I had had 40 years to think about what the seal's waking would mean, for the covenant, for the succession, for the political structure of the 7 ranked families who made up the Dravenmore Compact. I had not spent much time thinking about what it would mean for the woman herself, because I had not known who she would be, and it is difficult to think concretely about an abstraction. But here she was, concrete and specific. A woman who held torches in the East Corridor and had been doing so for 11 years and had called herself Lysa Dravenmore off a roster, and she was asking what it meant for her. I owed her an honest answer. "It means you are the Luna of the Dravenmore Covenant," I said, "by bloodline and by the seal's recognition, which are the only 2 things that have ever constituted the Luna's legitimacy in the 400 years of the Compact's history." I paused. There was the rest of it, and she deserved that too. "And it means, if you are willing, that you are my fated mate." The last sentence I had not said aloud before to anyone in 40 years of having no one to say it to. It was a strange thing to hear in one's own voice, quieter than I expected, more certain. She looked at me. The gray of her eyes was very steady. She was a woman, I was already understanding, who did not look away from information she needed to assess. She was assessing me now, not unkindly, not with the performance of assessment, just actually doing the work of seeing who was standing beside her in a cold vault at the bottom of a cliff, while a 400-year-old stone poured warm light at both of them. "You've been waiting a long time," she said. 40 years, I said. "And you didn't know it was someone like me." "Someone like you," meaning a torchbearer in the lower East Corridor. "Yes." "No," I said, "I did not know. I had stopped expecting to know." She looked at the seal again, then at the mark on my wrist. She did not reach for it, she only looked, with the same practical attention she gave everything, cataloging it. "I need to think," she said. "Of course." "Not," she said carefully, "not about whether. I don't think I'm not someone who would say no to this." A brief pause, and something flickered in her face that was not quite humor but was adjacent to it, though I'm aware that might be the seal talking. "It might be," I agreed. "I would prefer eventually that it be you talking. But I can wait." "You've had practice," she said. "Considerable." The seal's light in that exchange had continued its steady burn, and now it did something I had not anticipated. It dimmed, not out, not dark, but to the level of a low lantern, the level of a kept thing rather than a woken one, as if it had made its statement and was now content to maintain rather than announce. I understood it as punctuation. The seal had said what it had to say. It was waiting as it had always waited, but differently now, not for recognition, but for what came next. We went upstairs. The great hall above the vault was not chaos, but the particular charged stillness that follows chaos. Every wolf in the hall was still on its belly, though they were beginning to raise their heads now, the boldest of them sitting up and looking toward the vault stair with an expression that was, if I am being accurate, almost sheepish, as if they had done something they could not explain and were waiting to be told whether it was acceptable. The ranked families who had attended the rite's upper hall waiting period were all on their feet, some of them gripping the backs of their chairs, the candles on the long tables guttering from the movement that had passed through the floor. The seneschal came up the stair behind me. He had said nothing in the vault after the seal woke. He was too trained for noise in a moment like that, but I felt him at my back, a steady presence, the 30 years of his service to my household expressed in the simple fact of his being precisely where he needed to be without being told. Lysa came up behind him. She came into the great hall in her plain linen and her practical overcloak, holding the extinguished torch still in one hand because she had not set it down, and she stopped at the top of the stair and looked at the room. 70 people in formal dress, 12 wolves variously on their bellies or in the process of sitting up, the long tables and the silver candles and the Dravenmore banners on the high walls. She looked at it with the same patient attention she gave everything. The room in turn looked at her. I came to stand beside her. I had served my covenant for 40 years. I had fought its border wars and arbitrated its family disputes and navigated its politics and held its compact against the 4 major crises that had threatened it in my reign. I knew the room. I knew what it was seeing. A woman it had never noticed, who had attended 7 of these rites as a torch-bearer and been invisible at every one, who was now standing at the top of the vault stair in plain linen with an extinguished torch in her hand, while the king stood beside her, and every wolf in the hall was either on the floor or pointing in her direction. I knew also what the room needed from me now. Not explanation, not justification, not a political speech about bloodlines and compact history. What it needed was the thing it had always needed from its Alpha King when the important things happened. Certainty. I had spent 40 years being certain about things I understood and certain about things I did not understand, and I had learned that the difference between the two was much smaller than it seemed, because certainty was not about knowledge. It was about will. The will to stand in a room and say, "This is the truth, and this is where we go from here, and I am not confused and you need not be confused, because I am your king and I have decided." I took Lysa's free hand. Not dramatically, not a gesture for the room. I simply took her hand, the left one, not the one with the torch, because she was standing beside me and it was the correct thing to do. She did not pull away. She held my hand with the same practicality she held the torch. This is something I am doing it. It is being done. I spoke to the room. The bloodstone seal has woken, I said. My voice carries in the great hall 40 years of practice. For the first time in 400 years, it has recognized a bloodline. The Luna of the Dravenmore covenant has been found. The silence in the room was very thorough. Her name is Lysa. Her bloodline is Asheville, the oldest of the founding lines, which the records had marked extinct and which is, as of tonight, evidently not. I paused. She has served this keep for 11 years. She is known to the east corridor, to the lower hall, and to the torch rotation of the bloodstone rite, which she has attended with reliability for the entirety of her service. Another pause. She is my fated mate. The mark is present. The bond is made. I raised my right wrist. The mark was dark and clear against my skin, the lines of it tracing the old Dravenmore pattern that I had studied in the lineage books for 40 years and never expected to see on my own body. The room did not move. Then, in the particular way that things happen when a room has received information it cannot contest, it moved. Lord Varick of the Seaholds, who was the oldest of the Covenant's ranked lords and who had attended more of my failed bloodstone rites than anyone else still living, rose from his chair and inclined his head. Not a bow. The ranked lords did not bow to their alpha, only to the compact's formal occasions, but the specific inclination of the head that in Dravenmore protocol meant. I acknowledge this, I accept it. The compact holds. The others followed. One by one, the 7 ranked families of the Dravenmore Covenant inclined their heads to the woman standing beside me in plain linen with an extinguished torch. The daughters who had pressed their palms to the cold seal and felt nothing. Their parents and escorts who had spent the evening upstairs eating well and managing, I imagined, their own complicated feelings about being here at all. All of them. The wolves, the ones who had finished sitting up, inclined their heads also. Or the wolf version of it, chins dropped, a slow and deliberate dip, the eyes going soft. Lysa stood beside me and received all of this. She did not cry. She did not seem overwhelmed exactly, but she was very still, with the quality of stillness that I was already recognizing as specific to her. The stillness of someone receiving more information than they were expecting and doing the serious work of making room for it, not performing calm. Actually being the kind of person who, when the world rearranged itself unexpectedly, set her feet and looked at the new arrangement and began, quietly, to decide what to do next. Her hand in mine was warm. I thought 40 years. I thought, she has been in my East Corridor for 11 of them. I did not say either of those things because the Great Hall was not the place for them. I filed them away for later, when we were not standing in a formal hall with 70 people watching and the echo of the seal's light still on both of us. Later, I thought. There would be later. The compact stretched ahead of us now, the whole long remainder of a reign that had felt, in recent years, more administrative than vital, and now felt different. As if the particular quality of the cold in the vault had been replaced by the particular quality of the seal's warmth, and the warmth, once it was present, had no intention of leaving. In the days that followed the rite, I did what I should have done in the first days of my reign. I had the full lineage records opened and read by the 3 best record keepers in my Covenant's hall. What they found, working through the layers of documentation and counter-documentation, and the specific archival chaos that attends any family line considered extinct, was this. The Asheville line had not ended with the last acknowledged heir 230 years ago. It had simply moved. The heir's younger sister, unmarked in the formal records because younger sisters rarely were, had married into the coastal settlements and taken the shortened name, and raised her family in the way of coastal people, which was, quietly, practically, oriented toward the immediate work of the sea and the weather and the land, and not much interested in the politics of inland compacts and formal bloodlines. The name had traveled through those generations in its coastal form, Ash, and it had arrived, through 3 generations after Lysa's great-grandmother, to a woman who had lived in a small harborside settlement and had a daughter named Lysa, and had called her Lysa Ash and had died before Lysa was old enough to ask her the questions that would have explained it. The record keepers presented their findings in a formal document, sealed and witnessed, on the morning of the 5th day after the rite. Lysa read the document in my study, sitting across the table from me, with the same careful attention she gave everything. She read it once through without expression. Then she read it again more slowly. Then she set it down and looked at the fire in the study's hearth for a moment. She knew, she said finally, my mother, I think she knew some of it. She used to say, a pause, something distant in her face. She used to say that we came from somewhere important once. I thought it was just something mothers say to their children, to make the ordinary feel less ordinary. Perhaps, I said. Or perhaps she knew more of it than she said, and she was trying to tell you what she could. Lysa considered this. She sent me to Dravenmore, she said. When she was sick, and we knew she was dying, she sent me specifically to Dravenmore. I thought it was because the keep offers stable work and she wanted to know I'd be provided for. But she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The seal had waited 400 years. I thought it was not impossible that the Asheville blood, even in its coast-worn form, had some sense of what it was near. She was a practical woman, Lysa said. So are you, I said. She looked at me, that assessing look again, not unkind, just actual. Is that useful? For a Luna. I think, I said, carefully and with genuine consideration, that it is the most useful thing. A pause, then so quietly it was nearly under her breath. Good. There was the matter of the announcement, and then the matter of the formal ceremony, and these things took time, not because I was uncertain about them, but because the compact's protocols were thorough and the ranked families needed to be managed with care. Lord Varick had given his inclination of the head in the great hall, and that was not for nothing. He was the oldest and the most influential, and his acceptance carried weight. But there were 3 of the 7 families who required more extended conversation before they would move from tolerance to genuine accord. I conducted those conversations myself. Not because my counsel couldn't have handled them, they were capable, but because this was important enough to warrant my own time, and because I wanted to say, personally, to each of the 3, I know this is not what you expected. I know your daughters pressed their palms to that seal and felt nothing, and I understand that is not an easy thing. And none of that changes what the seal has said, because the seal has been right for 400 years when everything else, the records, the expectations, the assumptions, was wrong. 2 of the 3 families came around within the week. The 3rd held out for nearly a month, which I had expected. They were methodical people, and methodical people need time to revise assumptions of long standing. I gave them the time. When they came around thoroughly, which is usually the way with methodical people, slowly, and then completely. During this period, Lysa continued to live in the keep as she had always lived. She did not move to the upper hall guest chambers immediately. She did not want to, and I did not want to force the transition on a schedule that was about politics rather than her comfort. She went about her duties in the East Corridor while the formal proceedings moved at their own pace, and this was, I will admit, initially startling to people who encountered her there, lamp in hand, doing the work she had always done, now also the officially recognized Luna of the Dravenmore Covenant. The senior housekeeping staff had a period of visible difficulty knowing how to orient themselves. She did not make it easier or harder for them. She simply continued doing the work, clearly, without drama, until the period of difficulty passed and everyone settled. I went to the East Corridor in the evening sometimes in that month. Not for any particular purpose. There was always purpose. There was always something to attend to, but I found I wanted to walk the corridor. My wolf found the East Corridor agreeable in a way it had never found any corridor before. We did not have long conversations. We had the conversations of people who are learning to be in the same space, which are mostly short and specific and practical. The state of the Lampwicks, the particular draft that came in under the east wall door in the wind months, whether the venison from the lower kitchen was better with the pear sauce or without, she felt strongly without. I had not thought about it previously and found, on consideration, that I agreed. She was, I am aware this is not the most poetic possible observation about one's fated mate, extremely competent at her work. The East Corridor's lamps were all correctly calibrated, the wicks trimmed to the precise length for maximum light and minimum smoke, the brackets cleaned of buildup on a schedule she had apparently established in her 2nd year of service, and maintained without variation since. The corridor smelled of tallow and pine resin and the cold salt air that came off the sea, and it was well lit in a way that the keep's other corridors were not always well lit. I began to notice, in that month, the specific quality of a place that is well cared for by a person who cares for it out of genuine attention rather than obligation. It is a different quality. I had lived in Dravenmore Keep for 63 years, and I had not previously been able to name that difference. Now I could. She paid attention to the things in front of her, all of them, without performance and without exception. That, I thought, was what the seal knew that the records had not a bloodline marker, or not only that, a quality, the quality of genuine, unhurried attention to whatever needed attending to. It was perhaps the most essential thing in a Luna, the one who holds the Covenant's interior life while the Alpha holds its exterior one. I had managed both for 40 years because there had been no one to manage the interior, and I had done it adequately, but adequately is not the same as well. By the end of that month, I understood something I had not understood before. The keep had been missing something for 40 years, and the East Corridor had always had it. The formal ceremony was held on the last night of the Iron Month, before the sea lanes opened again, and the ranked families departed for their own holdings. It was not a large ceremony by some standards. Dravenmore is not a city, and its ceremonies have never been elaborate, but it was correct. The great hall was lit with all its torches, the 7 ranked families in attendance, the Covenant's wolves present in the way wolves are present at important occasions. Quiet, watchful, their attention organized around the event without effort. Lysa stood beside me at the ceremony center in the dress that had been made for her over the preceding weeks, not elaborate, because she had made it clear she did not want elaborate, and I had made it clear to the household that what she wanted was what she got. It was good wool in Dravenmore's dark gray, well made, with the Asheville seal mark embroidered at the cuff in silver thread, because the record keepers had found the old Asheville mark in the documents, and it seemed right to restore it. She looked like herself. That was, I decided, the most important thing. I spoke the Covenant's formal words, the old words of lunar recognition that had not been spoken in 400 years, and that I had memorized long ago in one of my earlier decades when I still imagined I might need them soon. They sounded different spoken aloud than they had sounded in my head, more final, in the good sense, the sense of a thing being completed rather than ended. I placed the Luna's mark on her wrist, in the old way, which was not a ring but a cord of twisted silver and iron thread that was formally tied rather than clasped and stayed as long as the bond held. Lord Varick spoke the Covenant's response on behalf of the ranked families. His voice was steady. He was 84 years old and had attended the first Bloodstone rite of my reign, 40 years ago, as a young man recently come into his holding, and here he was at the last one, and the steady voice and the weight of that passage were both visible in him and not at all diminished by it. I would remember his face in that moment for a long time. The wolves laid their heads down. Not the concussive drop of the seals waking, this was something quieter, something chosen rather than compelled. Each wolf in the hall lowering its head in the particular dip that meant, in the language wolves use when they are being deliberate, "We see you, we accept you, this place is yours." Lysa watched them do it. She was still very still, the way she was always still in moments that required the serious work of receiving. I felt her hand tighten slightly in mine, not fear, not overwhelm, the particular grip of someone anchoring themselves in a moment they want to remember precisely, because they know it is the kind of moment you only have once. I understood the instinct. I had the same one. The sea lanes opened. The ranked families departed in the way they had arrived, by ship and by the coastal roads, carrying the information of what had happened into the wider Covenant. I knew, and Lysa was learning, that information expands as it travels, that by the time the story of the Bloodstone rite reached the far holdings, it would have acquired elements that had not been present in the actual vault, and this was simply the nature of important things happening in small cold rooms and then being reported in large warm halls. The core of it would remain. The seal had woken. The Luna was found. Her bloodline was Asheville, and she had been in the East Corridor for 11 years. That last part, I suspected, would be the part people discussed most. Not the bloodline, bloodlines are history, and people are more interested in the present, but the 11 years, the torch in the bracket, the senior housekeeping staff's preference for the warmer corridors in winter, the 7 rites she had attended without knowing what she was. That, I thought, was the part that had the quality of a story people would want to tell. I could not dispute it. It was, objectively, a very good story. Lysa moved into the upper hall chambers in the second week of the open sea lanes, when the political transition was substantially complete and the practicalities allowed for it. She did not, to the quiet confusion of some members of my household, immediately relinquish her East Corridor duties. She trained her replacement, a methodical process that took 3 weeks and that I was told, by the senior housekeeping staff, was the most thorough training any East Corridor position had ever received in the history of the position. And she checked in on the corridor for some time after, not because she doubted her replacement, but because she had spent 11 years calibrating those lamps, and she wanted them to remain calibrated. I found this entirely appropriate. I did not say so, because I suspected she would find the observation less useful than the ability to go check on the corridor unimpeded, and providing the latter seemed more helpful than offering the former. We had our long conversations, eventually. In the evenings in the study, and later in the spaces that became ours as we made them ours, the west battlement when the weather permitted, where you could see the whole sweep of the sea from the cliff's edge, and the keep at your back felt like a structure with purpose rather than weight. She told me about the coast settlement, about her mother, about the 11 years. I told her about 40 years of a failed right, about the exact quality of watching a piece of granite for 4 decades, about what my wolf had felt when she came through the vault door. She listened the way she did everything, fully, without performance, with the specific attention of a person who has decided that this is worth attending to. "The wolf," she said one evening, before the seal woke. "You said he moved." "A small movement," I said, "the way a dog lifts its head at a distant sound." "What was he noticing?" I thought about it. "A door," I said. "He was noticing a door that was about to open." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the sea made its steady sound against the cliff face, not violent that night, a comfortable rhythm, the sea in one of its patient moods. "I didn't feel anything," she said, "until my hand touched the stone. Before that, I was just cold and doing my job." "I know. Does that matter, that you felt it first?" "No," I said with certainty. And then, because she deserved the full version, "My wolf is a wolf. He feels things ahead of understanding them. It took my understanding some time to catch up to what he already knew. The order of it doesn't change what it is." She considered this. "What did your understanding eventually say?" she asked. It was the first time she had asked me anything that could be called a direct question about the feeling of it rather than the fact of it. The practical woman asking an impractical question. I noticed the step, and I took it seriously. "That I had been waiting for someone who paid attention," I said after a moment. "Not to me, specifically, not someone waiting and watching for my approval or performing for my notice. Someone who paid attention to what was in front of them. The lamps, the wicks, the draft under the door, the proper count of 30 heartbeats when asked to stand at a cold stone." I paused. I had been running a covenant for 40 years, and the thing I had been missing was someone who would simply see what was there, and do what needed to be done with it, without asking whether it was significant enough to warrant attention. She was quiet for a long time. "That's a very specific thing to have been missing," she said. "I had 40 years to get specific." She turned her head and looked at me, and in the light from the study hearth her eyes were the gray of the sea in still weather, and she was not assessing me in the cataloging way, not doing the practical work of deciding. She was just looking, the way she looked at the east corridor lamps when they were correctly calibrated and the work was done. "The corridor is going to be all right," she said. "My replacement is competent. I checked today." "Good," I said. "I think," she said, "that I am going to be all right too." "Yes," I said, "I think so." The fire in the hearth had burned low by then, down to the particular orange that is almost amber, the color of a kept thing, present and warm, maintenance rather than event. The sea outside kept its patient rhythm. The keep around us was quiet in the way of a place where the wolves are settled and the halls are well lit and the work of the day is done. I thought of the seal in the vault below, warm now and still, and after 400 years no longer waiting. I thought of the east corridor, properly lit. I thought of a woman who had come to a clifftop keep 11 years ago because her dying mother sent her specifically here, and who had done the work given to her with genuine attention and without ceremony, and who was now sitting in my study looking at a low fire, with the same quality of quiet competence she had brought to everything else. The Dravenmore Covenant had its Luna. And I, who had spent 40 years watching a piece of granite in a cold vault, had learned something I might have known much sooner, had I thought to look in the East Corridor. The things that last are almost never the things that announce themselves. They are the things that simply continue, patient and uncelebrated and precisely calibrated, doing the work, keeping the light. She had always been here. The seal had always known. And the keep, in the way of old places that have held their breath a very long time, was finally, quietly warm.